Good morning and welcome to the Bloomberg Live event, Disruption, the New Economic Driver. I'm Carol Massar, host of Bloomberg Business Week on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg TV. Today, we're going to hear from leaders and talk about how they are and should be navigating and embracing disruption. The challenges brought about by the pandemic have highlighted now more than ever the need for businesses to be continually nimble and prepared for change. Each of our speakers represents a different sector of business, and they'll be sharing their approaches to how they lead their companies during moments of change. We'll be asking a number of key questions as we really seek to better understand how a mindset of self-disruption and innovation can be a driver for future economic success. Now, before we get started, just a few housekeeping announcements. First of all, I would like to acknowledge our sponsor, AlixPartners. I'd also like to welcome our global community who are tuning in, including the thousands of listeners on social media and also those on the Bloomberg terminal. Do please make sure you're using Firefox or Chrome. Refresh your browser if you're having any issues with sound, and you can restore windows using the buttons at the bottom of your screen. Now, the size of each window, it is adjustable. You can also join the conversation via social media, and we would love to hear from you. Encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook using the handle @Bloomberg Live or @Business. So let's start our program. And before we get to our CEO panel, here to kick it all off is Simon Freakley. He is the CEO of AlixPartners. Over to you, Simon.
Good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, I'd like to thank Bloomberg's Carol Massar and our panelists for making this event happen. With the pandemic causing a global reset, this conversation is critically important in understanding the forces that are driving the world economy today and how to respond so that we have the opportunity to succeed tomorrow. The COVID-19 crisis has laid bare the central economic reality of our times. Disruption is the new economic driver. Cycles of disruption have effectively replaced credit cycles as the primary driver of the global economy and business. Business leaders are grappling with multiple concurrent forces that are upending how they do business, and disruption is what keeps them awake at night. AlixPartners surveyed more than 3,000 senior executives around the world for our 2021 Disruption Index. What we found is that the cycles of disruption have emerged as the central strategic challenge for business leaders today. Global executives say that managing the forces of disruption is their greatest strategic challenge, and these forces range from technological advances to shifts in consumer behaviors to a changing regulatory environment. But surprisingly, COVID-19 wasn't the top concern for most businesses. New and evolving competition, artificial intelligence, increasing regulation were all viewed by executives as a greater challenge than COVID. This underscores how pervasive and dynamic the forces of disruption are. Business models and strategies which have proven themselves successful over many years are fast becoming obsolete. Though COVID-19 may not come top of the list of disruptions, its impact on the way we do business is obviously profound and lasting. Take this virtual event, for example. In our survey, global executives said that the pandemic has permanently altered aspects of how they'll do business, especially in their interactions with employees and customers. What's the best way to respond to disruption? Be proactive and act now. Our survey found that executives who are alert to the forces of disruption on their business and have actively addressed them view their companies as being in a better position now than they were a year ago. Successful companies respond to disruption by accelerating the transformation of their businesses and being rigorous in the execution of their strategies. They build the right structures and culture to enable effective coordination and communication while keeping agility. They disrupt and reinvent themselves before others do it to them. At AlixPartners, we recommend to our client CEOs that they do the following. First, focus on a few priorities that really matter. make the hard choices, and then drive and measure progress on these few essential priorities. Secondly, execute, execute, execute. Disruption is here to stay, so you need to respond with a relentless focus on execution. And thirdly, over-communicate your vision. A clear and compelling vision of the future is only valuable if it's shared with others. Leadership means inspiring and motivating others to quickly take the bold steps to build a stronger and more sustainable future. As we often say to our CEO clients, be your own chief communication officer. The stakes have never been higher. In a volatile environment, clarity, control, and pace are a necessity. The economic and competitive environment may not be in anyone's control, but how we respond and the speed at which we respond absolutely are. In the midst of one of the most profound public health and economic crises the world has ever experienced, we just saw how quickly businesses and society can transform when necessary. And if businesses have been able to transform quickly and effectively in the face of COVID-19, it shows that they can meet the challenge of the other massive disruptions that will shape our future. I'm very excited for the panel today. Thank you, Carol, for moderating this important discussion on the forces of disruption with the leaders at the forefront of managing through them. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Well, great context and setup for us. Let's get to that CEO panel. It is my pleasure to welcome Mitchell Baker, CEO and Chairwoman of Mozilla, Joanne Crevoiserat. She is the CEO of Tapestry. We've also got with us Richard Gelfond, CEO of the IMAX Corporation, and Mark Hoplamazian. He is President and CEO of Hyatt Hotels Corporation. It's really like a dream panel because you guys are coming from different walks of life. Before we get going and before we start talking about disruption being an economic driver, I do want to ask you all about the outlook, what visibility you have, because I feel like we're all trying to gauge when do we get to kind of the post-pandemic side of things. And, you know, recently we just got some news from J&J. We're having a pause here in the US about the usage of that vaccine. It's a reminder that it's not a straight path forward. So Mark, let me start with you. The hospitality industry shut down by the pandemic. How is the outlook? What do you see?
Well, first of all, Carol, thanks for having me on the panel. I would say that, you know, we've been enjoying some very positive momentum since the end of January this year in the United States. China went through a shutdown and has reopened again and is growing significantly post-reopening. But I would say that as much as we see booking activity steadily increase, we're also positioned to be ready for a potential retraction. And the only reason we are is not because I have a crystal ball. The one thing I've learned over this past year is that that's not possible. But we become conditioned to just recognize that the path forward is not able to be predicted much past the coming week or so. And so we remain ready to pivot if we need to. There's no evidence that that's a problem at this moment, but you know there are more surges that we're seeing due to the new variants that are now the dominant caseload in many countries, quickly becoming the primary one in the United States. So we remain ready for a retrenchment, but so far we've seen positive momentum.
Joanne, come on in on this, because retail too, anything with brick and mortar was really shut down. You have brick and mortar, you have e-commerce. Tell us though about your brands, whether it's Coach, Kate Spade, or Stuart Weitzman. What's the outlook? What do you anticipate for the coming 6 months, 12 months?
Well, I will say we're optimistic, but the operative word, you know, over the past year has really been agility. You know, echoing Mark's comments, we had very little visibility coming through the pandemic as to what the trends would be. And our focus as a company has been to get closer to our consumer, to lean into digital and data and analytics, tools that are becoming more available. We were seeing some of these disruptions happen pre-pandemic and really embracing that, and then becoming a leaner and more agile organization so that we can be more responsive as we see these trends unfold. I will tell you that a year ago, we weren't talking about or thinking about the opportunity to see a vaccine roll out quickly, and we are here now. There has been a setback, particularly with the news today, but we continue to be optimistic. I think our customers are optimistic. They're looking forward to getting out and embracing the physical world again. And we've been encouraged by the amount of support and the amount of engagement we've seen all the way through the pandemic with our brands. And we think we're well positioned and believe we're well positioned as we come out of the pandemic to continue to serve our customers.
You said agile. There's tons of books, but this is one that I recently interviewed, Doing Agile Right. We're all trying to figure out how do you get through. Rich, you, like so many others on our panel today, you went into COVID early because of your exposure over in Asia. You came out of it earlier because of your exposure in Asia, China specifically. How better are things? How are things going? Are people coming back to theaters?
Yeah, where people feel safe, Carol, and in fact they are safe, they're coming back to theaters in some cases even in record numbers. So China, for example, we operate in 84 countries, and in China we typically do about 10% of the Chinese box office on 1% of the screen. So Chinese New Year is the biggest movie-going time of the year in China. It's around February, and this year was up 30% over the record, which was 2019. In Japan, we had a film called Demon Slayer, which became the highest grossing film in the history of Japan, highest grossing IMAX film as well, despite capacity limitations a couple months ago. So there's no question in my mind where it's safe, it's going to bounce back, and it already is in a big way. You look at North America, we just had Godzilla versus Kong, which, as you know, opened way stronger than people thought to around $50 million its first weekend. Europe is a little slower, a little bit more troubling, as is Latin America. So I think you really have to look at this on a region by region basis. And again, as others were just saying, I don't think you could get too high or too low. One of my favorite business sayings, it's never as good as it looks or as bad as it seems. So I think you have to look at, as a trend-wise, it's getting better and not get too distracted by the short-term news.
We say that in broadcast. It never is as good as it feels, and it's never as bad as it feels. Mitchell, come on in on this. Firefox, I feel like we've all been online so much more, right? Obviously, working from home, we've all been browsing a lot more. Has Firefox and Mozilla benefited from what has happened over the last year? And I say that because there are companies that actually came out winners, during the pandemic. And I'm just curious how you guys saw it.
What we've seen in the last year is change in habits. The title disruption, I think, is quite real here because even online, people's habits are changing. What they're doing, you can see that. And so I would say, Mozilla, our goal is a better internet. The reason that our organization exists is to build a better internet. We do it through the market, so we're a software vendor, like others, but our actual motivation is something quite different. And so Firefox has done quite well in the last year. And in the bigger picture, I'd say, both the good and the bad of the current state of the internet have been magnified. And so obviously, in the larger picture, we'd say we'd really succeeded because we're all living online and doing things online we hadn't imagined before. But also the issues with the nature of online life and the way our engagement works are so obvious. And so, with Firefox, we try to address that now even more. How do you search things? How do you find what you want? How do you find with Pocket, content that's worth your time, not clickbait? How to test out ways of engagement that aren't about building outrage for more engagement so that our, you might say, the better side of human nature can be more reflected in online life. And that, of course, is a work in progress.
Well, when it comes to disruption, I'm looking at the four of you and I'm thinking, okay, is it a world where I'm not going to business travel as much and not go to Hyatt hotels? Am I going to, Joanne, be living in my jeans and yoga pants? Am I going to continue that in fashion not so important? Is it Rich, I'm going to sit on my couch and just constantly stream? And, Mitchell, am I going to continue still browsing or do I go back out into the world? And, Mark, as we look at the disruption that's happened, how has it impacted you? How are you approaching kind of getting business travelers back in general?
Well, first and foremost, I would say that rumors of the death of business travel have been greatly exaggerated. We're seeing remarkable interest among corporations getting back to convenings, getting back to meetings. I think there's some basic issues that a lot of tech company executives who are talking up their own book with respect to the digital platforms that are now commonplace miss, which is that the power of human connection remains significant and I think essential to life going forward. But that's true on the leisure side and on the business side. So do I think that 2 years from now, post herd immunity and full vaccination, or to the extent of the people who want to be vaccinated being vaccinated, do I think that it's going to look the same as 2019? No. Do I think that the general volume of travel will be similar? The answer is, or better, the answer is yes. Because there is this basic human need to go and explore. That's on the leisure side. And companies really rely on building culture and differentiating who they are through the way it feels to people more than the paycheck or the career path. And so most of our big customers are big employers of people who are doing systems integration, consulting, the big four accounting firms, and all the tech companies. That really represents our top 10 customers. And all of them are expressing concerns about how they're going to maintain a sense of community and a sense of culture and purpose in a time when there is more remote working going on. So we intend to be a part of that through new programming and new ways of using our hotel properties.
Well, and I want to get into the specifics in terms of disruption. Come on in, yeah.
Well, I was going to jump in as you asked at the beginning and just say I couldn't agree more with something Mark said at the beginning, which was the narrative put forth by talking your own book. So with all due respect to Mozilla and to others, I do think that there's a recency bias, and there's meaning whatever's happening today is going to happen forever. And I'm talking your own book. So we all know Netflix is saying, people are going to stream forever, and that's the new answer to everything. But I don't know about you, my wife and I, we stopped watching TV except for news and sports like 2 months ago because we can't take it anymore. And I still read the reports about how people are never going to go to movies. But to Mark's point, gathering and culture and being part of a social organization are embedded in the human race. And if I could turn it back, because you represent the media, Carol, I think, the media has a little bit fallen for that bait. And I don't think there's been enough saying like, yeah, you're locked in your kitchen. It doesn't mean you're not going to restaurants. You're locked in your living room. Doesn't mean you're going to leave your couch. So I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Just to say, it's very rare that Mozilla's lumped in with the tech giants and what they have to say. So I might take a little, I appreciate the respect. I think for Mozilla, we are not advocates that everything stays online and people don't want to go out and be people. I think we probably are advocates that there is change and that this has been a massive spike in disruption and more is coming. So this question of what's online, what's really better physical, what are the new mixtures of them, I think is very real. And certainly, the joys of IMAX, for example, are impossible to get at home.
Well, come on in. Yeah, I'd love to jump in here because I think, what the way we see the world is that the digital is an amplification of physical. It's not an either or, it is an and in our world. And, I think some of those digital behaviors will be sticky. What we're seeing from our customer is, and I'll use China as a market that has reopened and recovered for the most part. And we're seeing growth in our brick and mortar stores and growth in digital. So it's a way that consumers are engaging with brands. it now includes these digital platforms. What we saw at the beginning of the pandemic actually was our customers reaching out to us and looking for us to engage them with our associates from the stores. We've had tremendous innovation across the world with associates getting online and doing virtual shopping parties where consumers couldn't come into the physical store, but they wanted, Mark, to your point, that human connection. They wanted the styling advice or the gift-giving advice that our associates are so well positioned to give. And so we're finding now that our associates and our sales store managers are becoming social media influencers of their own and engaging with consumers on these social media platforms. And consumers really wanting that connection and that community around our brands like Kate Spade, Coach, and Stuart Weitzman. They want to feel connected. So we're seeing, again, China is a great example. We continue to see strength in our digital business globally and expect as the economies open up and the physical world opens up, our consumers will come back and engage in our physical stores as well.
So what specific, Mark, come on in, what specific disruption have you seen that is going to turn out to be an economic driver for you guys longer term?
Well, look, I think the big reaction and response that many in our industry undertook when the pandemic hit us now 13 months ago was to understand and quickly try to accelerate the development of digital tools that would assist in allowing some elements of the hotel experience to be more self-service. So the incidence of digital check-in, for example, or using digital keys, which have been around for a few years, has gone up a lot. But we've also extended into more digital resources for exploration of travel and booking of travel. And very importantly, some of the key friction points on property, like in our restaurants, for example, we recognize that the stresses of, say, a family of four, one parent with two kids, they're wanting to get off the table and go to the pool, having to flag a server for the bill and then provide a form of payment and then wait for it to come back and so forth and so on. It's a lot of friction, and we digitize that now. So you can order through your phone, you can pay through your phone, and this is actually opening up something that Joanne just referenced, which is the engagement of our colleagues now with guests is all about their experience and what else we can be doing for them, not about getting the folio to the guest for them to be able to sign. So those kinds of advancements, which are continuing to accelerate in our world, will be with us for a long time to come.
Rich, what about with your business? I mean, do you need to do anything to get people back to theaters to feel comfortable after the pandemic? What's been your experience? You talk about China. Do you have to change anything, or is there anything that came out of the pandemic and what you saw that will be kind of a driver for you, an economic driver going forward?
So actually, it relates back to the safety factor. I think it just can't be safe, but I think people have to feel safe. So I think you have to step up your game on consumer service a little bit. Thank you for coming back to the theaters. We missed you. I think you have to, whether it's things like the way you get in and the way you exit and separating people, there are little things. But for us, Carol, we use the time more, and much like the others have talked about, on complementary lines of business. So we have something called IMAX Enhanced, which when you're in your home on a very large TV, streaming or whatever, we can make that image look a lot better. We started an artificial intelligence joint venture with a very accomplished partner, so we can up-res images, whether it's on computer monitors or TV screens. We've been working on a direct-to-consumer app because our model is a little bit of a B2B business, so that way we can more communicate with our consumers. We also are wiring all of our theaters in the network so we could provide live content, or think of a global premiere done simultaneously in hundreds of theaters. So rather than there being a weakness in our core business, we looked at it as an opportunity to build ancillary businesses.
One thing you said to me, I know in our planning call, Rich, is that you can't be a one-trick pony. That's one thing that really has stayed with you as a result of the past 12, 13 months.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really scary but true is that this probably isn't the only pandemic we're going to see in our lifetimes. And we've seen smaller versions before. So I don't think you could just sit around and say, gee, I hope this isn't going to happen. I think you need to come up with ancillary revenue streams and different forms of diversification. So when, I won't even say if, but when something like this happens again, your cash flow still keeps going. So I think that is an important point, Carol.
Joanne, your digital business, you talked about it, doubled in the past 12 months. What do stores look like in the future? Do they still matter?
Yeah, I want to add too that the disruption that we've seen in the last year has really enabled us to move faster and innovate faster behind the transformation initiatives we already had underway. We were seeing the digital trends happening in the space before the pandemic, and they certainly have accelerated through the pandemic. We were seeing a consumer wanting to engage with brands more digitally and physically, so that omni-channel experience we talked about a lot. And we believe that stores still matter. And as I mentioned, we see digital as amplifying the experience for the consumer, but that experience and that physical touch point still matters. The role of the store is changing, and having omni-channel services, buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup wasn't really a thing before the pandemic. We all worked very quickly, and we worked very quickly within weeks to implement it. So we're seeing innovation happening.
And it stays with us, Joanne, it'll stay with us?
I think to the extent that a consumer wants that level of convenience, absolutely. The level of which, the level of each of these omni-channel capabilities, the penetration will depend, I think, on what's going on in the consumer's life and frankly, in the backdrop. So if they're not comfortable coming into a store and want to transact virtually, if they want to have a shopping appointment at a time where they think it's either more convenient for them or less crowded in our stores, and they'll feel more comfortable to have a shopping appointment, they'll be able to make shopping appointments. We've invested and will continue to invest in what that store experience is. We opened a store in Shanghai that's a completely digitally immersive experience that uses gaming technology that can adapt to what any consumer walking in needs, or what, so it's a very unique experience for each consumer. So it's those kinds of investments to make that store experience unique and very special for each of our brands. Those are the places we're investing.
Mitchell, like Joanne and Tapestry, you guys over at Mozilla have been in the midst of a transformation. I think you said it was the middle of a mess right now when we were talking, that there was a lot going on in this past year. So the disruption that you've had to deal with, how is that helping or hurting you to innovate and to deal with that transformation?
I would agree with Joanne that the recent disruption has accelerated our transformation. And our transformation is from like the very early part of the internet. Like Mozilla's like the oldest thing on the consumer internet, like literally. And so in internet time, 20 or 30 years, we're ancient, right? Which has benefits and value and credibility. And, we know what we're talking about. There's been a modernization piece. So the transformation for us are things about how to combine our DNA of real privacy and security with information, i.e. data and AI. And how do you do these things? How do we at Mozilla do these things differently in ways that we think are better? So for example, information is power, and I want all that information about me. The machine learning systems probably understand how I behave better than I do. The data is there, and what motivates me and what makes me purchase, what makes me happy, what makes me outraged. Is it 3 seconds or 5 seconds? Is it red or green? All of these things are known, but not by me. And so the question for us is, that information is real power. How do we take that and put it at the hands of the individual? Like, I want that information, especially the health information. And so that transformation is a lot of product exploration, and it's a lot of deep technical work to say, how can we use information in a way that's different and has the individual at the center? Very similar sort of customized experience as you were describing in the stores. Because some people, want the information broadcast widely, and some of us want to control it more. So that's the kind of exploration that's underway and that's been driven through this disruption.
Yeah, I'd love to just build on that too. In our stores, where we have, as part of our transformation effort, applied data and analytics more fully in our value chain, so that we are leveraging that technology and those capabilities to tailor what goes into a store to be more reflective of what consumers want. So really understanding the consumer and getting that sharper focus, leveraging data to be able to help us make decisions that make that experience so much better for our consumers. And that's really a part of our transformation.
How was the data, though, that you rely on disrupted in the past year? Mark, you had said something to me in our planning call about needing to find new signals to create better visibility, that, you know, the old algorithm tools and pricing data, like, they just didn't work anymore. So I'm just curious how your data has been disrupted, and that how that newer data will stay with you in the future to predict kind of where the business is going.
Yeah, it's been a great unlock of creativity. You know, what struck me listening to Mitchell and Joanne is there's that old expression, which is necessity is the mother of invention. And in our case, you know, 95% of our business went away overnight about a year ago. So we realized quickly that all of the models, and both pricing models, but also behavioral models that we've got for different groups and different travelers, was basically irrelevant at that moment in time. And so we thought, okay, well, we can't rely on anything that we've had in the past, and all of the algorithmically based models that we had utilized were of no use. So we sort of went back to the drawing board with a completely white sheet of paper and started tracking things like mobility data, engagement data, search data from all of those from Google. We looked at TSA information and tried to also keep track of, we went even so far as to try to keep track of the fleet planning for airlines, because there's a long lead time for airlines planning their fleet deployment. And we thought, well, you know, it's interesting to speculate about where travel might surge, but if there's no lift, if there's no airlift to those markets, even though the radius of driving actually expanded a lot from maybe a max of 200 in many cases, we still depend on air travel. So those are the things that we started to go towards. And we've learned a lot about how we can actually, with those data streams, enhance how we are forecasting, yes, during this disrupted period of time, but I think a lot of that's going to stay with us.
You know, Rich, you had a good question that you said I'd love to ask everybody, and the question was, what narratives that are coming from the media and everyone else that the world is changing forever that you think are false narratives? And we've talked about, I know certainly here at Bloomberg a lot, that we're all going to be working from home, that we're all going to be streaming, we're not going to restaurants, the demise of the big city, all these big things, or as I kidded with Joanne, that I'm going to be living in my yoga pants. I mean, what are the narratives that are out there? And, you know, Rich, let me start with you. You talked about the streaming narrative. Are there other narratives too that you think we need to be smart about, that maybe it's not going to all change, or maybe it will change dramatically?
I think some of the narratives are that, you know, that will, let's start with what will change, is I do think that streaming and distribution patterns for specialty content are going to be different. So I think if there's a movie that's geared to a very small demographic, or could be a foreign language film, things like that, I think it is much better and much more efficient to stream those to targeted audiences where you won't have to spend all that money on marketing because it won't be recouped. But I think by the same token, what we've seen in other countries in the world is that even though there are alternatives in the home, people are anxious to get out of the home in greater numbers than people are talking about. So, you know, let's talk about what I mentioned briefly in Japan, this movie called Demon Slayer. I mean, imagine at 50 to 75% of capacity, it became by far the biggest grossing movie in the history of Japan. So that suggests to me the concept of pent-up demand, and you don't know it until you see it. But probably all of you have seen it in your businesses so far where you've been open and safe. And, you know, frankly, I'll talk about airline travel. Since I got my second vaccine and hotel staying, I mean, I'm less price sensitive than I was before, because I had over a year without spending any money, because, you know, I'm not 30 years old. I'm much happier to spend money on experiences than before. And I think that's a narrative that maybe people haven't gone deep enough into, Carolyn. They know little changes they've seen during the pandemic, such as, you know, the things that we've all talked about here, less business travel, not going to the movies. But I don't think people have really dug deep enough and said, your own mortality, which everybody's faced, including, way younger people that are used to facing that. I mean, those are kind of societal changes that it's going to be very interesting to see afterward, how people's lives and philosophies are changed.
I find it interesting that there's,
Go ahead.
sorry, Carol, just a quick comment. No. So many people talk about content. Everything is about content. Well, there's this other thing called experience that really matters. And I think, IMAX is known for this, right? But I think a lot of what Rich just touched on is about the experience of it, not just the content itself.
And I'll just add that our consumer continues to have an emotional connection to our product. And there may be elements of comfort that carry forward from the pandemic, that maybe we'll want to wear yoga pants a few more days of the week, but we are seeing the consumer come out and really embrace our product with an emotional response and reaction. We've seen a couple of our bags at Kate Spade, a very cute heart-shaped crossbody bag go viral on TikTok. So these platforms where our consumers are organically finding, there's a new one out now, a strawberry shaped bag that has gone viral. These are not things that consumers need. They're things that they want, and they have that emotional connection to our product. We're seeing nice response and a beginning of a wedding season, perhaps, that may come back and a lean into bridal and dressy. And so I think as you start to think about these real life events that people have put on hold for a year, we expect that fashion will be back, and there may be other elements of comfort that stay with us for a little while, but fashion will be back. It almost feels like a back to school moment, right? Your first day of school, when you want to go out in the world and dress up and show your friends. I think there's a lot of optimism and some pent up demand for actually getting out in the real world and engaging emotionally with the products that we carry.
Got to say, I bought a pair of heels in the midst of the pandemic and couldn't wait to finally wear them. And it took me a few months, but I got them on. Mitchell, what about you in terms of false narratives that are out there, whether it's in the media, that we need to be smart about, that you think are either not going to stay with us or will stay with us?
Well, first I'll say I too am very eager to get out in the real world. I miss being out, that's for sure. And in particular, what we find are those spontaneous, creative conversations are very hard to figure out how to do online. But in the disruption and the narrative piece, I would say we have a narrative that's sort of either or, like we're going back or we understand the online life. And I think the narrative is we've had this spike in disruption and innovation, and how does digital life interact with physical life? And those changes aren't done. So at the end of this spike, we've moved up a plateau in a higher level of integration. So maybe curbside pickup was an innovation, but there'll be other forms of innovation. And so I think this narrative that is we're going back or it is the way it is now, none of those is really correct. And we're I think should see this disruption as the beginning of a long innovative cycle, where we've had this crisis that has shifted us out of our mindsets, but that we'll see ongoing changes in what's actually real life or physical life or digital life. And that relationship between the experience or your sales associates, we could think of that as maybe step 3 and something that's going to be 50 or 100 steps long, and how we have an experience with a product that's unique to me and maybe in a store. And, maybe I go shopping and then I go to a movie, all of those things I think are all in a state of flux right now. More exciting to be out and actually do them, but
It would be nice, right? We have a poll question that we recently put out across Bloomberg's global social media channels, which I'd like to bring into the conversation, get your thoughts on. We asked the question, what is the biggest disruption facing your business today? Remote working, 26.4%. Automation and AI, same thing, 26.4%. Data privacy and security, 23% roughly. Competitive landscape, almost 24%. Rich, what do you think about that? What's your reaction to that poll?
Well, my reaction to the poll is when I looked at it on the side on the screen, I thought a lot of those are opportunities, frankly. So I think changing competitive landscape, as the panel was talking about before, it forces you to think differently into new businesses maybe you haven't thought of. AI, as I mentioned to you, it's something we've explored because I think it opens doors. I think if I had to choose one, I think remote working is an interesting one. And, my guess is tech companies may feel a little different than experiential companies. My guess is that those of us in out-of-home ways think about it remotely. And I spent most of the pandemic at a second home I have out on Long Island. But as movies, theaters started to open and sets started to open and directors came back, I strongly had the point of view that it wasn't really appropriate for me to sit in my hot tub in October and think about how to reopen the world for out-of-home entertainment. So I felt strongly that we as an organization needed to lean in to getting back to work. And it may be different for different kinds of organizations, but some of you were just saying a minute ago about spontaneous ideas. And I've been back in my office in Manhattan since last September. And I think it's just unleashed so much creativity. But more, I think it's a question of leadership. So can you really lead the world out from a pandemic into doing different things from your home? Maybe in some industries, but in general, I'm biased. And I think in my mind, that's one of the ones we have to deal with.
We only have a few minutes left, and I want to quickly get all of your responses on this. Mitchell, come in on this, because you guys have been working from home for a long time at Mozilla, right? That's part of what you do.
Yes, we've been a remote culture from our beginning, 20 years probably, from the developer DNA source. What I would say is that your poll is interesting to me because either you pick very well or they all have high responses. I would say from this that I think everything is still in a state of flux. And I mean that in an optimistic way. There's opportunities, but that we are in a time of change. We've had the spike of disruption, but the change will continue. So for those that like change and look forward and want to do new things, it's a phenomenal time with a fair amount of opportunity in it. Some people don't like change, so that will be hard. But we are in that time of change, and I guess it's no surprise since I do have this tech. I do have this connection to technology. I would say automation and AI, because I think it affects all of the others and everything else you could put on that list. From competitive landscape, obviously data privacy and security, but working at home, what's it like? Who do you engage with? All of those things. I think, and so this question of what is trustworthy AI, Mozilla has a very large initiative on that. Not just trusted, which is human emotion, but trustworthy. What are the criteria of a system that is worthy of trust, especially one that knows more about us than we do, and underlies increasingly more and more?
Mark, you want to come in on the poll and your takeaway?
Yeah, so I have to say, I look across those topics and the reaction I've got is to look through a human lens and ask the question, what is the human experience associated with each of these? Some of it relates to trust or trustworthiness, as Mitchell just mentioned, especially over the past year, watching the polarization of this country and, excuse me, and how information flow and sources have become almost impossible to decipher in terms of what the validity of what's being reported is actually. So that's one issue. But the second issue is just a normal life question, which is, if remote working, I agree with what Mitchell said. We're in a state of flux. This will look different a year from now. I don't know exactly how, but it will look, I think, could look very, very different. So we need to keep our minds open. We have to maintain a beginner's mind as we experience this. But from my perspective, I'm looking at it through the lens of human experience. I think this whole topic of well-being, holistic well-being, is essential for us to remember, because the stresses that come with a lot of what's on this list are not appropriately discussed or taken into account when we have these discussions.
This is the other book I was going to show you, Beating Burnout at Work. I mean, these are the books that we've been talking about constantly. Joanne, your take on the poll here.
Well, I concur with what much of what's already been said. As I mentioned, we embarked on a transformation prior to the pandemic hitting, and we saw many of these trends, maybe without remote working, but we saw many of these trends accelerating in the marketplace. And I do see this as opportunity. The competitive landscape is changing, and I think automation and AI are important disruptors across all industries. And our focus at Tapestry has been to really position our company to be able to take advantage and win in an environment that's changing like this. So I started with a comment on agility. Agility matters, and setting up the organization to be able to adopt this new technology and leverage it for the benefit of our business, for the benefit of our consumers, is something that we've been focused on. And I think, also according to the poll, I see it, continuing to be important in the future. And I think it'll help us win. And I agree with the comments around remote working. We're not going to go back to the way it used to be. So the question is, how can we make this environment sustainable for doing our business in the right way going forward, and sustainable for our people to ensure the well-being of our teams, so that we can continue to thrive going forward.
I'm going to do a rapid round, so you all have to be kind of quick, but I want to ask you a question. Rich, this one first to you. So I feel like this has been a grand experiment, a very painful experiment at times, the past 12, 13 months. Would you say disruption became an opportunity to grow an economic driver for your business? Yes or no?
Yes, for sure. I think the new circumstances, humans are very adaptable, and the will to survive is primary. And I think you put those together, it forces you to look at different ways of doing things.
Mitchell, your take.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Things we never really imagined could be done online are online. And so that's a driver of opportunity, challenge, ability to move in all sorts of different ways, from, as I said, browsing to content, but also what's your experience engaging in content and what is it like to be online? And that overall experience, and I'll even maybe echo Mark and say, how do we amend it so it drives us closer towards holistic well-being?
Mark, your take.
Absolutely, yes. I think probably the biggest lasting dividend, if you will, from this past year is a changed way of working. I think going faster, being more adaptable, applying a growth mindset at every turn. These are the things that will persist and continue to add value over time.
And Joanne?
Yeah, I'll wrap it up by saying that, I agree that it's been a catalyst. It's allowed us, to build a case for change. It was quite clear when all of our stores closed that there was change that we needed to do. And I would argue that it helped us accelerate and be more bold than we would have been otherwise. So, and the innovation has been tremendous across this past year.
I've been weaving some of our audience questions into the general discussion, but I have one last one I just want to quickly ask you guys. What do you think will be the next big disruptor, and how can we prepare for that? Just quickly, Joanne, what do you think will be the next big disruptor?
I think the continuation, as Mitchell said, I'll echo that. I don't think we're done. I think we're in the first few steps of a technology disruption and a digital as an enabler, and I think we're in the early innings of that.
Mark?
As we now believe that this coronavirus could be an endemic part of our lives going forward, I think how we respond to future, I think Richard was the one who said there's a certainty of another pandemic in our lifetimes. I think, how we collectively respond to these things going forward is going to be another unfortunately, another disruption in how we organize information, how we coordinate, and how we deploy either vaccines in the future or other healthcare.
Mitchell?
I'd say mindset, because all sorts of things will happen, whether it's a pandemic or, flooding of millions of people, with water levels rising. Who knows? So I would say I think the next big disruptor is really mindset, which is partly our relationship to technology, but partly our relationship to experience. Is that consistent? If you have these great experiences, is it going to be periodic in life as these things happen? Can we get back to us or work our way to a new sort of sustainability, not just for us and our people and teams, but planet-wise and weather-wise as well?
Rich, final thought for you. What do you think is going to be the next big disruptor?
I think it's going to be artificial intelligence. I think artificial intelligence is kind of what the internet was a few decades ago. And, there's so many simple things, whether it's ordering a cab or food for takeout. You can't see where they are. But I think AI is so big, it's going to change our way of life in ways we can't see.
Folks, thank you so much. I could talk for hours with you. We learned so much. Rich, Mitchell, Mark, Joanne, thank you, thank you. Be well. Really appreciate it. And I do want to thank our yes, thank you. And I do want to thank our fantastic panel. We had a fascinating, wide-ranging conversation. We're going to be bringing in Jeff Sonnenfeld of Yale in just a moment to continue this discussion. Before doing so, though, I'd like to briefly pass it back to Simon Freakley of AlixPartners, get some of his thoughts on our CEO discussion. Simon, over to you.
Thanks, Carol. Really terrific panel discussion, and the themes that came up absolutely underline not just the output of our research, but also at AlixPartners, our experience of working with clients on so many of these disruptions. You know, the discussion brought a few things home for me. Now, number one, technology is not just a disruptor itself, but connectivity is an accelerant to so many other disruptions. The point, of course, that disruptive forces present opportunities to businesses, not just challenges. So how do we lean into those opportunities and be agile and capitalize on them? Which of course leads to this mindset point that Joanne raised, how we have the right mindset to take advantage of those new markets and opportunities. This leads, of course, straight into leadership, how leaders husband their companies through these choppy times. And I know that Jeff Sonnenfeld is about to have a discussion with you. And Jeff, of course, has rich experience in the whole area of leadership. So I really enjoyed the panel discussion. Look forward to your discussion with Jeff. Thank you. And back to you, Carol.
All right, Simon, thank you so much. What a great summary of our panel. And next up, it's my pleasure to introduce Jeffrey Sonnenfeld. He's Senior Associate Dean for Leadership Studies at the Yale University School of Management. And Jeff, so great to have you here with us. There's so much to talk about. You heard the panel, you heard what Simon had to say about disruptive forces. Give me some of your thoughts about what you just heard.
Well, thank you. I think Simon did an exceptionally good job of capturing this theme of technology along with what the disruption itself means in terms of finding opportunity. The Chinese character, of course, the characters for the term crisis is made up of two lines. One line which indicates danger, another one indicates change and opportunity. And I think that Simon captured that well. And AlixPartners often goes into situations of despair and finds great new ways of reinvention. And if we took a look at these four companies, Carol, they're a whole semester's worth of knowledge. In fact, you could have had a great hour discussion with just any one of these people because of the way they've been inventing their companies through all this. Wouldn't you agree? They're very optimistic in their approach. Very, I think, not at all caught up in some of the angst and the danger of it all. They were finding opportunity. So I thought that if you have one category of things they talked about, which was how do they see through the crisis in the midst of it? I think that Mark, for example, was talking about in the hotel business, we weren't quite sure what was going to be happening from week to week. And there's a whole set of issues having to do with the crisis itself. And then coming out of it, how do we see ourselves differently? And you asked some great questions about the false narratives and what's really going to last and what's the new normal. So in the first part, I think that this is a group that is not caught up in hand wringing. They weren't coming up with empty cliches. I think it was very important, as you saw that Mozilla said, as Mitchell was saying, that we have always been operating, and they sort of came to their fore, operating through technology, operating remotely. Whereas Rich was saying, we're just trying to figure out where the new opportunities were, that not to believe the bad news, that we're going to be basically circling the drain of despair, because people will be coming back and that there'll be this surge of interest, surge of opportunity. So not to get caught up in the hand wringing. And of course, he was talking about in Japan and other places, as people are coming out on the other side of this crisis, is they're finding there's great enthusiasm. Mark was also finding that, but they also wanted to be realistic. And I thought that Mark was great about not talking about the empty cheerleading and hand wringing, not to promise more in the hotel business than they knew for sure was going to be there, but also how to keep that line of communications open throughout, that their role of the leader, they realized that they needed a lot of fireside chats. They needed ongoing, they had to help shape meeting at a time of crisis. People didn't understand what was going on. And I thought all four of them were very good about coming out with shaping what that new meeting is. I think that they...
Well, Jeff, let me just jump in for a second, because I do feel like when it comes to crisis management, I feel like it's been turned on its head during the pandemic. And I saw it, I felt like firsthand when we started reaching out to companies, 13 months ago. I think people were terrified to talk about that they had no visibility on their business, right? People were initially maybe afraid to talk about George Floyd and racism. And then all of a sudden they started to come out because they needed to, or their employees pressured them, or their customers pressured them. Tell me about crisis management. What did we learn? Has it changed forever as a result of the pandemic? Because it sounds like I picked up on that a little bit, certainly from our conversation with four CEOs.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we did see is that when you talk about flashpoints, whether or not it's the voting issues of today or some of the issues of wedge issues that Mark was referring to, that sort of caught them by surprise how divisive society could be. And also a lot of the unknowns, just strategically, as you were referring to, people were a little bit afraid at first, CEOs, can we, when they realized we're making claims about getting tomorrow's, another day and, like coming off like Scarlett O'Hara with simplistic promises that take your lumps and not to worry, this too shall pass. We don't know how long it'll pass, how long it'll take, and yet we're looking to the CEO for the answers. They got increasingly comfortable by saying, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's how we close the gap. As we take a look at the research today, no matter which survey outfit we look at, one thing they all agree with is that CEOs have a soaring platform of credibility. That is, the media, sadly, Carol, and ourselves in academia, in public officials, elected officials, whether or not it's the federal, state, or local level, or even the clergy, have all been dropped down a peg in terms of public trust. But people like the four you had on this panel recognize they have a responsibility to speak to the crisis, and they've become increasingly comfortable taking on that role, whether or not it's a strategic crisis or whether or not it's something going on in society. And answering that is that it's with now, this wasn't true in 2008. It wasn't true in 2000. We looked with some concern, but it's true now. Business leaders are looked upon as a critical source of confidence, and that's what these guys were saying. They have some different points of view. Obviously, the sense of experience was way more important for Joanne in retail and Mark and Rich than it was for taking a look at Mozilla, where they're saying we're able to do a lot of innovation through our technology, through leveraging online, because they've known how to do it, and they're not selling the in-person experience, of course, as much as the others. But that notion of partnering that Joanne was talking about, how we realized that we need to stay nimble to reinvent our business. I thought that Joanne was fast.
Well, one thing I want to jump in is that Rich Gelfond of IMAX, he said to me that early on in the crisis last year, that at some point an outside PR consultant, Jeff, said to him, listen, hide and be quiet. And I'm not sure if this was specifically about the pandemic, but also Black Lives Matter and so on and so forth. And Rich was kind of like, no, this is kind of what we need to be doing. We need to be out there. And I do wonder if that's changed. And I bring that up because, here we are today. We have a letter that's in the Wall Street Journal, or it's in the New York Times, it's in the Washington Post. Hundreds of CEOs, whether it's Amazon, Starbucks, General Motors, Google specifically, Warren Buffett, coming out and saying basically that we stand for democracy. They're speaking out specifically against voting restrictions, looking at what's going on in Georgia and elsewhere around the country. Some of our CEO panel, we taped this earlier before that came out, we reached out to them, and Rich said, you've not signed the letter, haven't been asked to, but they're welcome. They definitely support it. Joanne over at Tapestry, they have a partnership with More Than a Vote. It's a voting rights organization led by LeBron James. So they've been out there. What is the responsibility of leaders in a time of disruption and innovation?
Well, I think this panel spoke to that well, and it's a great way to weave together where they were on this interview and the breaking headlines now, is that all four of them in different ways spoke about the emotional side of both of their businesses, and of course, a sense of safety as part of the new normal, whether or not it's the wellness around for their workers or the safety of the products. Who the heroes are is a respect for the front line. It's not just the people at the tops of the organizations. You remember how Rich said he felt guilty being at home in his hot tub in the Hamptons or whatever, as people were coming out in September, October to work on the front lines and making the films. You realized symbolically, to your point, he needed to be out there. And that was a very dramatic demonstration that Rich had. And the emotional nature of, as Joanne was talking about, what these products represent is tying that into the headlines right now in terms of voting issues and others. They recognize that part of their job is to make meaning. And there are some communications consultants who weren't sure what the right answer was and how to script the CEOs. So they told them wrongly to hang back. They can't hang back. They have to be out there. And if they don't know answers, it's still reassuring to say, we don't know. For anybody who listens to us today that has a military background knows that when somebody's in the foxholes, in the trenches of combat, it's just if the top brass says, we know you're there and we care, that's reassuring itself. It doesn't have all the answers, but somehow to be in touch and to have that line of communications going is extremely important. And we saw that we have some political leaders, unfortunately, in the last few days who have suggested that business leaders should stay quiet. We'll take your money and be quiet. Well, it's a statement of defiance with the ads and the public statements that you were just referring to, Carol. Statement of defiance that no, we're not going to retreat. We think that's part of our duty, part of our civic duty. We have to have a free functioning democracy to work well, and we have to have free markets work well side by side. It takes a free flow of communications. We don't want our leaders to be somehow hidden in dark, smoky rooms and aren't seen out there. So I think these people are very comfortable trying to explain what they knew, what they didn't know, how they changed their attitudes along the way. And
do you think this stays with us, Jeff, though, longer term, or do you think it's just the right thing to do right now? I do wonder, post-pandemic, the innovation disruption, whether it's hybrid working, working from home, some of the different trends, and I tried to get to that in the panel about, the narratives, which are false, which are real, what stays with us, what disruptors, or innovations really stay with us going forward in your view? Does hybrid working, do we work from home? Do CEOs kind of have to have, a moment of reckoning to say, listen, we're going to have to accommodate workers?
They were talking about hybridization in different ways to move to the new technologies. As Mark talked about the online sign-ins, I actually joined Penny Pritzker of Mark's organization had invited me to join an advisory board 30 years ago with the technological capability Mark talked about that wasn't implemented to bypass the front desk and do a lot of those things. And as Mitchell said, the technology has accelerated us forward to do things we knew we should have done a long time ago. And Mark's example is a perfect example. There was not on the technological frontier to be able to do some of the things that Hyatt's doing now, but the hotels weren't doing it. So now they are. So those are some new normals that are changing. And Joanne was basically saying that we have seen things happening between the multi-channel approach that was going to unfold over the next 5 years, but it wound up happening over a 5-month period. So dramatically accelerating that curbside pickup and things. So that is some examples of new normal that are there that accelerated these changes that are coming. And I don't think it's a passing it's a passing fad. We're going to revert back to something different. As Rich was talking about, even he was trying to figure out how, even though when you asked that tough question just about what are some of the disruptions coming that are overstated, that what are some of the false narratives, is of course Rich doesn't want to say that streaming is going to replace the film experience, but he did talk about ways that they were adapting, that streaming will be much more specialized for small targeted demographies or small targeted interest groups, and that they're trying to think about ways that they can use AI to also reach into the computer experience. So that you can see both sides were trying to adapt to do things a little differently with a certain hybridization, that we're not going back to the way things were, even though there's some things they were hoping for. Surely Joanne was hoping we come back to celebrating events and weddings come back and fashion comes back.
They'll come back. I know all these people
Yes.
planning weddings. Jeff, one thing I do want to ask you, because this whole panel is about, disruption leading to economic growth. You talk with a lot of CEOs. You're a go-to person when it comes to what CEOs, what's on their minds, what's going on with leadership. What are you hearing from CEOs when it comes to the disruptive forces that are going to be really good for their businesses?
Yes. Is that, if we've talked about so far what they've told us about drop the cheerleading, giving straight talk, and don't do hand wringing, because these were not hand wringing people. These were very optimistic, problem solving people, and keeping the lines of communications open. We said there were some lessons they gave us, but this expect the new normal you've gotten to, I think is really important. It's just not going to be the same. And I think they've got good ideas about how they reinvent themselves going forward, but they have to make sure that we don't expect people that we're going to somehow drop backwards in a nostalgic type way, think that when all this passes, we'll go back to business as normal as it was. It's just not going to be there. So, I think that's right. If you think of what these CEOs do well, and you look at the four of them collectively, they were so eloquent. The use of imagery they have, and in our research, we find that personal dynamism is really important, that they use evocative imagery, and they're physically out there even through this pandemic. Secondly, there's something they were very good at. There's a lot of empathy for their workers and their customers. They were in touch with them. So that empathy was really important. A third one, they kept joking about one another, talking their book and things, and directing some of that about technologists kind of overstating capabilities, teasing perhaps a little bit with Mitchell. But actually, none of them were talking their own. There's an authenticity is a really critical quality. You didn't feel anything being swept under the carpet, and yet they also are not happy with the status quo as maybe a fourth quality. They're looking onwards. How can we reinvent what we're doing? The innovation that Mozilla, of course, for 2 decades that she was there, that she saw about how they're constantly reinventing themselves. This is not a new challenge for them. It's a newer challenge for the other three on that reinvention, which they've mastered. But that constantly challenging the status quo. And probably the last one is on resilience. This was a body blow to all of us, adversity. But instead of being stumbled or felled by it, they embraced it with enthusiasm. You could it was palpable excitement about this new normal that they're talking about, that rather than seeing any kind of a bereavement for what they've lost, this certain kind of resilience. And not that they were welcoming this catastrophic pandemic, but they weren't felled by it. It's like what Nietzsche said, that what doesn't kill me makes me stronger.
Well, having said that, what do leaders need to be thinking about and doing better to be prepared for the next disruption? As Rich reminded us, it's coming. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's coming. And I put that again in context of this letter of CEOs, hundreds coming out and saying, they need to be speaking out about some of these big social matters, whether it's inequities, wealth distribution, racism. So what do we need to see in our leaders to be prepared for all of this?
Well, to that big question you've asked, there are different consequences for the internal culture of their organizations, as well as what they speak to all those disparate external constituencies. The map of a CEO's set of stakeholders is a complex one. There is a certain primacy to the shareholder. However, even Milton Friedman in that renowned or infamous, depending on your point of view, New York Times Magazine article that he wrote back in 1971, where people have interpreted that as the only responsibility of business is the bottom line. He didn't say that quite there. He did say that there's a lot to do with the ripple effects. The societal ripple effects are important for these people to address. And I think that for these CEOs recognizing that they don't want an angry society. It's not good for shareholders. It's not good for work. It's not good for customers. So somehow reweaving the tapestry of America, and of course, and these are global businesses, as we spoke so much about some of their businesses in Europe, where it was lagging a little bit, by the way, candidly, whereas they told us were taking off more in Asia and China, especially Japan. But is that how do they reweave the tapestry of these societies so we don't get into this vilification? But the finger pointing, the anger, the sense of which side are you on? That doesn't work with businesses, and it doesn't work for our democracy or for free enterprise or for these free markets. Is that they have to
it's something Mitchell has thought about a lot in terms of how the internet can and should be better, because we've seen how it can be a force of good, but we've also seen how it can be a force of bad. And she thinks about that a lot. Just got a few minutes left here. Younger executives who might be listening right now, how should they be thinking ahead and preparing for being good leaders in challenging times? Is it something that you just have? Is it something you have to learn on the job?
Well, it's people wonder if it's made or born, and it's a combination. There are people who have natural advantages. These people, their leadership styles were different. Not only were their industries different, but you could just see that their styles were extraordinarily good matches. If you had to have an archetype for each in their respective sectors, I couldn't think of anybody who was more comfortable with mastering technologies for years as Mitchell did, and that as she has taken through the different life stages of the business. But then you take a look at Mark, and you can see how sensitive he is to the travelers, and knowing it's going to be a while before they get the business travelers back. But how are they serving the recreational travelers differently? And then Rich, of course, understanding the consumer entertainment experience, but also the creative developer that he was talking about. And then Joanne, and sort of understanding how do we create that experience of shopping to deal with the online experience, is finding that opportunity. Is that you might look at the four of these people and think, well, how does my character match up against them? Just not that you can't have different styles that are cross-purpose with the industry, but if you had to take a look at stylistically matching them, is what you would think about how somebody thinks. As Rich is very expressive, very verbal, very verbal, and you could see that Mitchell was very contemplative and thinking at different stages. And an unbelievably great listener is Joanne. And Mark, was thinking of the ripple effect of his business on other industries, as he's so dependent in the travel business on the wealth of others. You can see, so when you pick your business, a young executive could think, how do I match up against these different people? Another implication for a rising executive, a new member of the workforce, is to take a look at how opportunity abounds in every one of these. There's an opportunity for reinvention in each one. However, they're at different paces and in different places. So I think in terms of trying to figure out where you fit, you could take these people and you really couldn't slide them into each other's jobs. Sometimes a problem we perhaps in business schools is we think of managers as interchangeable parts. They're not purely. These people grew up and were groomed in their industries, and they could move into other roles, but they're very well suited for the roles they're in. So we should try to think about, how do you build on your strengths, as these people did. These people were not opportunistic job hoppers that were randomly hopping around from place to place. With younger managers, I often see people that start to go through too many jobs too soon, because they're almost in a manic craze that no job is perfect. Well, you try to make your job better, but also build up a track record of expertise where people can say you actually know something and you're not looking like your friend.
And it's interesting, just to wrap up, because you've got to run. I know we could talk for hours with you too about leadership. I remember Mark at Hyatt saying to me on our planning call that I need the cross-functional teams who can, we learned in the pandemic, be able to pivot quickly to whatever was needed. So, it's interesting too that they're talking about the kind of workers that they need as well, to support their leadership teams, certainly in times of crisis. Jeff, you're a dream, a go-to when we want to know what's on the minds of CEOs. So really appreciate your input. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Their pandemic pivots were excellent. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for including me.
You bet. Take care. Take care of yourself. And we're going to have to leave it there, everyone. Thank you to all of our speakers for joining us today. We are grateful for everyone's participation and also their perspective. Really just kind of hit on so many different points. Thank you to our sponsor, AlixPartners, for making this briefing possible. And if you'd like more information on this topic from AlixPartners, please visit the resources tab. It's on your screen. To our audience, both within and beyond the Bloomberg community, thank you so much for joining us. You can follow the conversation with at Bloomberg Live on LinkedIn, Twitter, or certainly like us on Facebook. And to learn more about other upcoming events, visit our website at bloomberglive.com. Finally, to everyone who joined us today, don't forget you can watch this again on demand. There's a lot of great information there. Thank you so much. Stay well, everyone.